Wow, this stuff on narcissism you sent, it's really something else. I'm ready to get into it.
It's a topic that I think a lot of people can relate to.
Definitely. It's something that so many people have to deal with. So let's jump into it. We're taking a deep dive into an excerpt called The Hidden Truth Behind Narcissism, Recognizing Manipulation for Validation and Power. And it really gets into why people do this stuff.
Yeah, understanding the motivation behind it is really key.
So what is at the heart of narcissism? I mean, this excerpt really emphasizes that it's more than just being self-centered.
Right, it's a much deeper issue.
Yeah, it's deeper than that. They always need validation and need to be in control. It all comes from a shaky sense of self-worth, right?
Yeah, you can think of it like a house built on sand. That's the narcissist's inner world.
Right.
And because it's so unstable, they're constantly looking for validation from outside sources to try and reinforce it.
It's they're always trying to prove something. Not just to the world, but to themselves, too.
Exactly. And this is where the manipulation comes in. It's a coping mechanism.
So the excerpt goes on to describe some of these classic traits of a narcissist, like being charming and grandiose and lacking empathy. Oh, and gaslighting, too. It's they can be so charming at first, but then you realize it's all an act to get control over you.
It's all very calculated, like a persona they put on to draw you in. They might shower you with attention and praise.
Oh, and then there's that whole love bombing thing.
Exactly.
What does that actually look like?
Well, imagine being in a whirlwind romance where there are extravagant gifts and compliments nonstop, and they're saying you're their soulmate. It can feel pretty amazing.
Right, but it's all just a tactic.
Yeah, it's all designed to make you emotionally dependent on them before you even realize what's happening.
That's kind of scary. So how does this need for control actually play out in relationships?
Well, after the love bombing phase fades away, you start to see their true colors.
Oh, so that's when the need for validation and control takes over.
Yeah, and that leads to a cycle of manipulation.
So you go from this amazing high to a really confusing low.
Sadly, that's how it usually goes. And this is when you start to see the more damaging side of narcissism. They might start making subtle digs at you, like about your looks or your accomplishments.
Or they might try to gaslight you.
Exactly. They deny your reality, or even try to isolate you from your support network.
Wow. So they want to control everything.
All these tactics are designed to give them control over the relationship.
It's a roller coaster. Intense highs and then these horrible lows. You end up feeling confused and questioning your own sanity.
And that's exactly what they want, because it makes you more dependent on them, which feeds their need for validation and control.
So how can you tell if someone is being manipulative? Are there any warning signs you could look out for?
Well, pay attention to how they react when you achieve something. Say you get a promotion at work.
Okay.
A narcissist might downplay it, or try to take credit for it, or just completely shift the focus back to themselves.
Because they need all the attention.
Right. Their need for validation is so strong that your good news is almost like a threat to their ego.
I see. They might also try to isolate you from your friends and family.
Yeah, so that you become more reliant on them.
They're trying to create a world where they are the only source of approval.
You got it.
Yeah.
And that makes you constantly seek their validation.
Wow. This is so insightful. I'm starting to think about some things in my own life. But where do we go from here? What can you do if you realize you're in this kind of situation?
Well, that's what we'll get into next. We'll explore some practical ways to recognize and break free from these manipulative patterns.
Okay, so we'll be talking about ways to reclaim your power and set boundaries.
Exactly.
This has been so helpful. Thanks for explaining all of this.
Of course. It's important stuff to talk about.
Yeah, it really is. So let's take a quick break and then come back to talk more about
how to deal with these situations.
Exactly.
Dive into the shadows of human nature with the Lost Tapes podcast, where the truths hidden beneath our daily lives are brought to light. We uncover the layers of complex relationships, hidden emotions, and raw realities, from mental health to life's hardest truths. No topic is off limits, no story too raw. The Lost Tapes podcast is your invitation to understand the unspoken facets of life. Join us and let's explore life's hidden sides, one story at a time. Don't miss out on more hidden truths. Subscribe now to the Lost Tapes podcast. Stay curious. Stay informed. Click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to never miss an episode.
Welcome back. I'm glad we're continuing this conversation. It's so important.
Yeah, so before we get into specific tactics, I'm curious, does this type of manipulation only happen in romantic relationships?
Not at all. It can happen anywhere where there's like a power imbalance.
So it's not just about intimate relationships.
No, definitely not. You see it in workplaces, in families, even in friendships.
Like how?
Well, think about the classic workplace bully. You know, the boss who puts down their employees,
Oh, yeah.
takes credit for other people's ideas, or like creates this environment of fear and intimidation.
Ugh, I've totally seen that.
That's narcissistic manipulation too.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought of that. But I guess it makes sense. And I bet those situations are even harder to deal with at work.
Yeah, because there are higher stakes involved when it's your job. So it's super important to understand how this works and know how to protect yourself, no matter what the situation is.
Right. Okay, so let's get into some solutions. We were talking about boundaries earlier. So how do you actually set those boundaries? Like, what are the steps?
Okay, so first, you need to figure out what your non-negotiables are.
What do you mean?
Like, what behaviors are you absolutely not going to put up with?
Okay, so like identifying our limits.
Right, it's like building a fence around your emotional well-being.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
But how do you actually communicate those boundaries? Especially with someone who's used to getting their own way.
You have to be clear and direct.
Like how?
Just state your boundary calmly and firmly, and don't get defensive or apologize. For example, let's say you have a coworker who's always interrupting you.
Oh, the worst.
You could say something like, I appreciate your input, but I need to finish this task. We can talk later.
Okay. But what if they try to push back or make you feel guilty?
That's where consistency comes in. Don't give in. You have to back up your words with actions.
So if they keep interrupting,
You just repeat yourself. You could say like, I said I need to focus now, and then just turn back to your work.
that sounds easy enough.
It takes practice to stand your ground, especially if you're someone who hates conflict.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But remember, it's about taking care of yourself. It's not selfish, it's essential.
You mentioned before that it can help to document these interactions. Why is that?
Well, when you're dealing with someone who's constantly twisting the truth or gaslighting you, it really helps to have a record of what actually happened.
To prove they're wrong.
It's not really about being right or wrong. It helps you see the manipulation more clearly. And it validates your experience, so you don't start doubting yourself.
So it's like an objective record.
Exactly. And it can also be really helpful if you need to take further action, like reporting harassment or talking to a lawyer.
Okay. And you also mentioned getting support from others. Can you tell me more about why that's important?
Well, manipulative people try to isolate you from your support system. That's why it's so crucial to reach out to people you trust, like your friends, your family, or even a therapist.
You have people to talk to about it.
Yes, they can give you a reality check
Yeah.
and validate your feelings and remind you of your worth.
So they can help you see things more clearly.
Exactly. Because it's easy to get caught up in the narcissist's distorted reality.
Definitely. So we've talked about boundaries, documentation, and getting support. What if none of that works? Like, what if the situation doesn't get any better?
Well, then you have to ask yourself if the relationship is worth saving.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes the healthiest choice is to walk away, especially if the other person isn't willing to change their behavior.
That sounds really hard.
It can be a tough decision, but it can also be the most empowering one. You deserve to be in relationships that are based on respect and support, not manipulation and drama.
That's a good point. You know, this whole conversation has got me thinking about the more subtle types of manipulation you see in everyday life.
Oh, like what?
Like, what about those friends who always have to be the center of attention? Or who, like, subtly put you down to make themselves look better?
Ah, I see what you mean. It's so important to recognize those patterns, even in situations that don't seem as serious.
Because those little things can add up over time.
Right. It can really affect your self-esteem.
So do you use the same strategies? Like boundaries, documentation, and support?
Absolutely. Those principles apply to any relationship. Just remember, you have the right to protect yourself and your emotional well-being.
No matter who it is.
Exactly.
This has been so eye-opening. I'm really starting to see how common these manipulative tactics are. It's crazy.
It is, and just being aware of them is the first step towards building healthier relationships.
So true. Well, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, is there anything else we should know? Like, what about when you're actually talking to someone who's being manipulative? How do you get out of that conversation without getting dragged into their drama?
That's a great question. And it's something we'll cover in the final part of our deep dive. We'll be talking about some specific communication techniques you can use in those tricky situations.
Dive into the shadows of human nature with the Lost Tapes podcast, where the truths hidden beneath our daily lives are brought to light. We uncover the layers of complex relationships, hidden emotions, and raw realities, from mental health to life's hardest truths. No topic is off limits, no story too raw. The Lost Tapes podcast is your invitation to understand the unspoken facets of life. Join us and let's explore life's hidden sides, one story at a time. Don't miss out on more hidden truths. Subscribe now to the Lost Tapes podcast. Stay curious. Stay informed. Click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to never miss an episode.
Okay, so we're back and ready to talk about those tricky conversations.
Right, like how to handle yourself when you're actually face-to-face with someone who's trying to manipulate you.
Exactly. Like, how do you get out of that situation without getting sucked into their drama?
Well, one really effective technique is called gray rocking.
Gray rock.
Yeah. Have you heard of it?
I don't think so.
It's all about like becoming emotionally unresponsive. You basically make yourself like a boring gray rock.
Oh, I see. So they don't get anything from you.
Right, you just give them short, factual, unemotional responses.
Right.
And don't get into any arguments or try to justify yourself.
Wouldn't that just make them try harder to get a reaction from you?
You'd think so, but actually it usually has the opposite effect. When manipulators realize they can't get any emotional fuel from you, they tend to lose interest.
They move on to someone else.
Exactly. They'll go find an easier target.
That's kind of amazing. So you're basically protecting your energy by not playing their game.
Exactly.
Are there any other communication strategies that can help in these situations?
Yeah, there's another technique called the broken record.
Okay, that sounds interesting.
Tell me more.
It's very simple. You just keep repeating the same phrase or boundary statement over and over again.
Like a broken record.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No matter what they say, you just calmly repeat your message.
So it doesn't matter what they throw at you. Right. It might feel a little weird at first, but it helps you stay strong and avoid getting sidetracked by their arguments.
I like it. It takes the emotion out of the situation.
And it keeps the focus on your boundary.
You know, this whole conversation has really got me thinking about how much self-doubt plays a role in all of this.
Oh, definitely.
Like when you don't trust your own judgment or feel good about yourself, it's so much easier for someone to manipulate you.
It makes you more vulnerable.
So how do you build up that inner strength so you're less susceptible to manipulation?
It's a process. It takes time. It's about self-discovery and self-love. You have to challenge those negative thoughts about yourself.
And surround yourself with people who support you.
Exactly. Do things that make you feel good and build you up.
So you realize that your worth comes from within.
Yes. You are inherently worthy. You don't need anyone else to validate you.
This has been such an empowering conversation. I feel like I have so many more tools now to deal with these kinds of people.
I'm glad to hear that. Remember, knowledge is power. And when you understand these tactics, you can protect yourself and build healthier relationships.
Any last words of wisdom for our listeners?
Trust your gut. If something feels off in a relationship, it probably is. Don't ignore your intuition, and don't be afraid to ask for help. There are people who understand and resources to support you.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your insights with us.
It was my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into narcissistic manipulation. Remember, you're not alone. You are strong and worthy and capable of creating amazing relationships. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay empowered. We'll see you next time.